the investigators failed over and over again to connect all of the dots, including, by the way, the rather, you know, titillating suggestion that the KGB and the Russians might have been involved in some way, which I don't know, but it's certainly, out there in the ether that this might have been a very elaborate honeypot operation, which is, I'm sorry to say, not implausible.
Hi, I'm Fergus Macphee, and welcome to the Trump Report. You can watch us every day on our YouTube channel, Monday to Friday, and you can also listen and follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Joining me today is Charlie Sykes, political commentator and presenter of To the Contrary with Charlie Sykes. Charlie, thank you so much for coming back on the Trump Report.
Good to be with you.
Now, we're going to start, obviously, I think, with the Epstein files. I want to ask, because if you search the name of sort of Donald Trump, it appears in over 5,000 files, and we believe it has over 38,000 mentions of his name. But when I and sort of many other journalists were kind of poring over these files at the end of last week, we saw some of the more kind of shocking allegations against the president. And yet these are kind of all unverified, unsubstantiated. Many are from the FBI hotline, and some claimants were even later deemed uncredible. Trump himself has, of course, always denied any wrongdoing in his relationship with Epstein. I guess the question is, where do we go from here? Because you look at some of the allegations against, in the UK, people like Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and Peter Mandelson, who, those files have currently been sort of passed over to the police. And yet with Trump, as I say, everything that we've sort of found in there is kind of unsubstantiated and from anonymous tips.
Well, much of it is. We know a couple of things. Number one, we have not seen the full Epstein files. We also have the Department of Justice, which is clearly running interference for Donald Trump and scrubbing many of the files. But as you pointed out, we need to be cautious about it because they're not all verified. But there is a lot there, and you just highlighted one of the, I think, rather remarkable elements of all this, which is the contrast between the way this is playing in Britain versus the United States, or more specifically, the consequences for the individuals named. If you look at this, as a whole, the number of people who are in this network is kind of breathtaking. The scope of business leaders, political leaders, a kind of a who's who of the billionaire, global elite are caught up in this Epstein ring. It feels like 5 minutes ago, historically, there would have been severe consequences for anyone who was associated with this. They would be excommunicated. They would be shamed. They would lose jobs. They would not be welcome in polite society. Let me put that, mildly. And yet, it does certainly appear as if in the United States there will be few, if any, consequences. For Elon Musk, for any of the other folks, members of the Trump cabinet, how many people will lose their jobs? How many people will, in fact, be pushed out? Will be ostracized from polite society? And I think it's legitimate to ask on this side of the pond, why is that not happening? Why are there no consequences? Have we become so numbed in the era of Trump that we've moved the window of acceptable behavior that far that you can be tied to a sex predator who clearly was engaged in the rape and exploitation of young girls, and there's no consequences here?
I guess, like I said, the difference is with someone like Peter Mandelson, when a lot of those sort of corresponding documents from government have now been passed over to the police. With Donald Trump, and even you said Elon Musk there, I mean, the notes that I've sort of seen them mentioned, it's not a question of any illegality or criminal activity. It's, it's embarrassing, and I'm sure they both would prefer their names weren't in there, but there is a distinction.
Well, there is a distinction, but again, we have not seen everything. And in terms of whether it's unverified or uncorroborated, I think the question comes back, how thorough were these investigations? Why did Jeffrey Epstein get so many sweetheart deals? Why did prosecutors look the other way when the victims were coming forward? Many of the victims out there are saying, well, wait, we want to tell our stories. We want to be believed. and yet we have not been taken seriously. So I think that that is certainly part of it. Also, remember the Me Too era from a couple of years ago, the professional consequences, the people caught up in that experience. And in many cases, we weren't talking about criminal activity. And yet there was this sense that there were certain lines you could not cross. And the Epstein files are just full of red lines that were crossed. And I guess the standard we have to ask is, what is our standard for the president of the United States? Criminal behavior, or just the complete lack of character that unfortunately has been baked into the cake here in our politics?
Do you think we will see the remainder of the files? I think California Democratic Representative Ro Khanna, who's kind of been at the forefront of this with Thomas Massie, he said that we're only seeing half the files. About 3.5 million have been released, and he claims there should be around 6 in total.
I think we will eventually see them, but we may not see them in this term for President Trump. I mean, clearly there's an effort to whitewash, many of these files. The Department of Justice is running interference for Donald Trump, and these, let's face it, this is his personal Department of Justice. So at some point we will see more. And I was just thinking about this yesterday, that someday historians may look back on this with sort of a bafflement, how this could have taken place, how so many people could have known so much about it, and yet the investigators failed over and over again to connect all of the dots, including, by the way, the rather, you know, titillating suggestion that the KGB and the Russians might have been involved in some way, which I don't know, but it's certainly out there in the ether that this might have been a very elaborate honeypot operation, which is, I'm sorry to say, not implausible.
I mean, that is something that's certainly being circulated by some royal journalists and other people here in the UK. With the president, sort of like I said earlier, is there an argument to be made that kind of the grandstanding and the waiting and the deflecting that led us to this moment has been kind of more damaging than the release itself?
Well, the conduct is the most damaging. I mean, let's just realize what we're actually talking about. The number of women who were exploited, whose lives were destroyed. Many of these women are not survivors. They are not around to tell their story. So we are talking about a crime on an international level. The extraordinary thing about this story is the fact that here we are in February 2026, and we are still talking about it. You and I are still talking about this story because in our news cycle, most scandals, will rise up, will flare up, and they will be forgotten within 24 hours. This has gone on for week after week after week, and now months after months after months. And the reason it's not going away is because Donald Trump and the MAGA movement spent years convincing their base that this was really important, that they had marinated in these theories about what was in these files. So they were the ones that hyped it. They were the ones that said, this is really important. We should not cover this up. So, we're in the middle of this story. I don't think we're at the end of the story, and I don't know that we know exactly how it's going to end.
And of course, the main priority is to get justice for the victims, as you said. Is one of the reasons why this is the story that doesn't go away. You kind of described it there. Reading these files, it is extraordinary that whether it's kind of an association of any wrongdoing or not, almost there are just so many names of high profile people that appear in these time and time and time again. Jeffrey Epstein really did have connections to powerful people all over the world.
And that's extraordinary. I mean, I still have not gotten my head around how a guy like Jeffrey Epstein was able to create that kind of a network. How did he have that many contacts? How did that many prominent, successful people not know what they were getting into when they got into bed, metaphorically speaking, with Jeffrey Epstein?
Is there a suggestion? Ro Khanna again was sort of alluding to it, but then again, of course, he is a California Democrat. He was alluding to the possibility of him and Thomas Massie pushing for impeachment of Pam Bondi if the other files aren't released.
Well, there's a lot of talk about about impeachment right now in American politics, whether it's Pam Bondi or whether it's Kristi Noem. These things are largely rhetorical. They're not likely to result in anything as long because right now there are just not enough votes to remove them from office. But certainly they're going to keep the heat up. I mean, it was an amazing moment when the United States Congress defied, a Republican Congress defied Donald Trump and passed legislation requiring the release of these documents. I mean, that's really a departure from the norm here in American politics. So I think they're going to keep the heat on. They're going to keep the pressure on, which again is an indication that we are going to be talking about this for weeks and months to come, which is not the case with most of the Trumpian scandals.
We're also going to be continuing to talk about it because, just finally on this, both Bill and Hillary Clinton have now said that they will testify in the congressional investigation into Epstein. What's your reaction to that?
Good. I think they ought to, but of course, we have this weird double standard with the Republicans. They, are arguing that we must get we must get Bill Clinton under oath to testify about what's in these files or his association with Jeffrey Epstein, but have no interest in, getting Donald Trump to do the same thing. I mean, Donald Trump is the sitting president of the United States. He still has the power. So I think that double standard, that the partisanship is going to be hard not to notice. But again, if Bill Clinton has something to answer for, he ought to answer for it.
Before this happened, this new sort of tranche of files, we talked a lot on this show about the president's polling in the US, especially on on areas like immigration. It was kind of sort of record lows after what we've seen in Minneapolis. What's been the reaction to this latest release? Has that had sort of cut through yet with the public?
I don't know. I mean, it's all part of the swirling hurricane that surrounds, Donald Trump. I think the killings in Minneapolis have probably had more of an effect on his popularity at this point. You saw undoubtedly a special election down in Texas in an overwhelmingly Republican district that a Democrat won by 14 points, a 31 percentage point swing in a key district in the state of Texas, which is an indication that there are warning signs for the Republicans and for Donald Trump all over the place.
The situation in Minneapolis, you said, obviously really struck a chord with the public. Is there an element as well that one of the reasons that was because it was kind of shown around the world on video? We obviously saw it a lot in the UK. And another thing in the Epstein files, again with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and Peter Mandelson, there were very uncomfortable pictures of them released, and as yet I've still not seen any kind of footage or pictures of Donald Trump.
No, the thing about what happened in Minneapolis. I want to just go back to that is the power of people with cell phones going around. I mean, this story would not have played out the same way if you didn't have these little platoons of people from Minnesota recording everything from different vantage points, which really changes the dynamic and the way that we talk about this. I think that there would have been, perhaps a willingness to give the benefit of the doubt to the ICE agents who were saying that they were acting in self-defense. Once you see the videos, you realize that's not true. It also exposed the rank willingness of the Trump administration to lie about it, to tell people to ignore the evidence of their own eyes. And I think that was a breaking point for the part of the populace we call the normies, the people who are not necessarily intensely involved in politics, but when this is not acceptable at all, and plus you are lying to me.
And it's even led to sort of direct action. I saw this morning that from now on, I think ICE agents or border force patrols in Minneapolis will wear body cams.
Well, of course they should wear body cams. They should take the masks off. They should stop killing people in the streets. They should stop, violating, Fourth Amendment rights about search and seizure. So, I mean, and this, of course, is one of the reasons why the government came very, very close to a shutdown. Democrats had to decide, how far do we push this? Do we continue to fund ICE, or is this the moment where we draw a line in the sand? Now, very temporarily, they've kept the United States government open, but those negotiations are going to continue. And I find it, very hard to believe that Democrats will vote to continue funding ICE as long as people are seeing these kinds of abuses, on their screens, on their phones, on their televisions.
I want to move on slightly because I saw that you had shared this video on to your X account. Now, last night, the president spoke to former FBI Director Dan Bongino on his podcast and discussed the year's midterms. And sort of the full quote that he said was, the Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least as many as 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. What does he mean by that?
Well, we're going to find out, aren't we? Now, I think people are tempted to think this is more just Trumpian, blather that he's just, he's talking to Dan Bongino, who's part of the, Moranosphere here in American media. But this is also consistent with what we're seeing Donald Trump doing, weaponizing the Department of Justice and other federal agencies to beef up his big lie about losing the 2020 about winning the 2020 election. Under the United States Constitution, the power is decentralized and most of the elections are controlled by state government. So this would be a massive power grab. When he talks about nationalizing, he's saying, I think that Republicans should seize control of elections in Democratic states. And so I think for a lot of people who are watching elections and watching democracy, this is a 5-alarm warning. This needs to be taken literally and seriously.
And sometimes we do have guests on this show who talk about, they raise fears that they think the midterms kind of won't happen. I'm going to put on record that I think the midterms are going to happen.
Oh, I actually think so too. Oh, absolutely. No. The midterms are going to happen, but that does not mean that he will not interfere with those elections. He can also rig the elections without rigging the count. David French in the New York Times has a long article about all the ways in which the federal government can intimidate voters, can keep people away from the polls, can suppress the opposition, and then of course what you're seeing when you have the FBI raiding the election center in Fulton County, Georgia, a Democratic area, you can see a willingness perhaps to tinker with the outcome, and so yes, the midterms will take place. The question is, will they be on the level, or will Donald Trump find a way to bend them to his will? And which, by the way, is, I think, an even more serious threat.
And would one of those ways be around the subject of voting machines? Is something that often seems to come up.
Well, yeah, yes, and I don't know that he has time to be able to do anything in the midterm. But I mean, you're seeing things like voter intimidation, targeted voter roll purges, the administrative seizures. Will they defy the judiciary that tells them that there are certain things that they're not allowed to do? We don't know. I mean, I do think that it strikes me as somewhat hysterical to say that they will cancel the midterms. I think that would be a bridge too far for anyone. But there are so many other ways of undermining the election. And I think Donald Trump has shown a willingness to do this in the past. His willingness to spread, false conspiracy theories, his discussion of having the military seize voting rolls back in 2020, what happened on January 6th, 2021. This is a man who's already incited an effort to overturn an election. So you have to be pretty naive not to be worried about what he will do.
So, well, even in what he said yesterday on that podcast, he directly mentioned Georgia in 2020. I think he said something like keep your eyes on Georgia.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, when you go in and when he talks about 15 states, why 15 states? There are 50 states. So he's talking about going in to states that he lost or states that are run by Democrats and taking their control. You would think that conservatives in this country who have been talking about local control and states' rights for centuries now would push back against that, but we've seen how many of them are willing to bend the knee to Donald Trump. But this would be among, if not the most radical of his assaults on democratic norms if he were to try anything remotely like this.
Just quickly, let's talk about the Kennedy Center, because there's already been so much controversy around it after last year when Trump outlined plans to rename it the Trump Kennedy Center. He's now announced that from July, it's going to be closed from 2 years for what he describes as renovations. I mean, I don't mean to be flippant, but I think if you believe that, I've got some magic beans to sell you. This is a political act, isn't it?
Yes, it's a political act. It's a cover your rear end act as well, because I think he was embarrassed by the number of very prominent stars who said we don't want to collaborate with this. We don't want to perform at the Trump Kennedy Center. And you had Philip Glass, the composer, announcing last week very eloquently that he was not going to have his new symphony about Abraham Lincoln, in this particular venue. You had the cast of Hamilton refuses to show up. So I think they're looking at the prospect of 3 years of embarrassment of one group after another refusing to show up, empty seats, huge deficits. So what does Trump do? Well, what he's done is essentially, done what he did with many of his casinos. You can't declare bankruptcy with the Kennedy Center, but you can just shut it down. And the symbolism seems kind of on the nose, right? That Donald Trump takes it over, puts his name on, and then turns off the lights.
Well, absolutely, and I feel like I have a little bit of a personal issue with this. I mean, I'm someone who I really support the performing arts and culture here in the UK, and this to me, like, not just for the economy. I mean, it's going to result in job losses, but it just seems like a completely needless piece of cultural vandalism.
It is cultural vandalism, and there's a certain nihilism to it. We don't know what they're planning on doing, whether they're going to tear down the building or what the renovations have to do. But this was, I don't think anyone really accepted we need the renovations. Up until the day he announced everything was wonderful, right? But so we don't know what they're going to do. But this is a man that's torn down the East Wing of the White House, so nothing's off the table.
Yeah, no evidence from what I can gather has currently been given on sort of the claims that it is in disrepair. But there we go. I'm afraid that is all we've got time for, Charlie. But thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you. It's always my pleasure.